Hi, everybody. I am Barry B-Man Benning, and welcome to For the Love of the Frame, brought to you by Film Nobs. Now, today I'm going to address the movie Creed 2. And for the most part, I'm going to forego the usual plot setup because, and let's be honest here, most of us kind of know how this formula works by now. Our protagonist fights his way to the top for a chance to be the best and for all the glory that comes with it. And then he gets knocked back down, humbled, to a point where he questions himself and his motivations, then fights his way back to the top for a chance at redemption. Creed 2 does not buck any of those tropes, but in a way you have to ask, why would it? It's a formula that has worked time and time again, 7 times as far as this saga is concerned. But still, how do you keep an old, somewhat punch-drunk boxer on his feet for one more round, hoping to win the fight at least by a decision on points, if not by the knockout punch? So, one thing you do is bring in some fresh eyes and hope that they kind of work like a fresh pair of legs work in a boxing match. That's what the first Creed did by bringing in Ryan Coogler, who did double duty as both writer and director. And even though the story there and the beats kind of shadowed the original Rocky pretty closely at times, and Rocky 2, Coogler was talented enough to be able to find fresh things to say about it and fresh ways to say them. Enough so that you could make a strong case that the first Creed is actually the second best movie in the entire Rocky movie universe. This time around, we have another set of fresh eyes in the director's chair, those of Steven Caple Jr. And although Caple doesn't embarrass himself here, and he actually does a pretty good job during the fight scenes themselves, his overall style doesn't particularly stand out, and it's not really strong enough to overcome a very familiar formula. Coogler, like Rocky Balboa and Adonis Creed, he's a heavyweight champ, as we saw in Fruitvale Station, Black Panther, and of course the first Creed. Caple, on the other hand, is a journeyman, working primarily in television. And not that there's anything inherently wrong with that, it's just a different class of fight. And Caple seems to be fighting outside of his comfortable weight in this case. But Caple's own trainer, in this particular fight, doesn't really do him any favors. And in my analogy here, the trainer is screenwriter Sylvester Stallone, who takes back the reins of the franchise that he himself created. Unfortunately, it's this aspect of the movie that lets its guard down the most. At one point, the character Rocky tells Adonis, "It's your time now, kid." But the screenwriter Stallone, he doesn't seem ready to accept that fact yet. And he should, because Jordan is more than capable of carrying a movie, even one that's freighted with as much love and as much history as this particular one is. And the character of Creed himself, he's not a mere knockoff of Rocky. It's a well-constructed character with his own unique set of problems that he's got to deal with. Stallone doesn't seem to acknowledge this, or he simply just isn't ready to relinquish his spot as the focal point of the franchise. Now, one scene in particular comes to mind where Adonis and his love interest Bianca are, for the sake of saying too much, they're faced with a medical situation. But instead of staying with 2 of them like the movie should, we end up hanging out with Rocky in the waiting room as he wrestles with a problem of his own. Rocky's problem, while not unimportant, lacks the immediacy of the medical problem at hand, so it's kind of curious why we stay on Rocky. But even when Adonis and his family are front and center, they really aren't the most compelling characters in this film. And neither is Rocky for that matter. To me, that honor goes to the father-son duo of Ivan and Viktor Drago. The rage that fuels both of them remains mostly hidden on Ivan's face, but you can still see flashes of that rage in his eyes, along with feelings of sorrow, humiliation, all of which came from his loss to Rocky all those years back. Now, that loss led to even more devastating losses, the loss of his wife's love and the loss of his country's respect. And the rage of Viktor, much more apparent, both on his face and especially in the ring, as he deals with his abandonment issues by totally annihilating his opponents. Stallone's script centers on, besides himself as Rocky, of course, centers on father-son relationships and dynamics. And I just wish the champ could have gone the distance with this. I mean, there was a lot of potential there he set himself up with, and he just doesn't really follow through. I don't think it's a coincidence that the movie starts out with Ivan and Viktor. The good screenwriter that lives inside Stallone, and believe me, there is one there despite what some other people would tell you. That good screenwriter may have at least subconsciously realized that those two characters were the most interesting in the entire movie, at least as it's written. So, one thing that does help the movie are the solid performances from a seasoned cast. As I mentioned earlier, Jordan, he can lead a big movie. Tessa Thompson, fine as usual, although I kind of think that her character was a bit of a victim of the formula here. Florian Munteanu, and I probably destroyed that name, sorry. He's physically and emotionally convincing as Viktor. Felicia Rashad still knows how to steal a scene. And Stallone follows up his great performance in Creed with another good one here. But just as his performance in that movie was a standout, and somewhat of a surprise, I guess, to some people, the acting job that fits that description in this particular movie comes from Dolph Lundgren. Now, he's not going to be nominated for an Oscar like Stallone was in the first Creed, but his old pal, he definitely wrote him the best part I think he's ever had, one that requires some real acting. And Dolph is equal to the task. It's a very good performance. So, normally in boxing, you'll have the undercard matches that finally lead up to the main event, the championship fight. Creed 2, even though it follows its predecessor, naturally, still ends up feeling like one of those undercard fights. Not particularly bad in this case. Some solid punches being thrown from time to time. A couple of pretty exciting rounds. But still, nowhere near a main event bout. 2.5 knobs. And, as always, thanks for going the distance with me. And if you like the execution of my fight plan, or simply appreciated the effort, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And if anyone dares question why you're always singing Eye of the Tiger by Survivor, and by the way, shameless plug, go check out our mashup of the Creed and Creed 2 trailers. I want you to act like a true champion, or at least a true knob, and tell them you do it for the love of the frame.